Kalam podcast is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy listening to Kalam, please subscribe to the show in whatever podcast application you're listening to right now, and please give us a rating. It helps other people find out about us. And if you'd like to support the show with a small donation, consider signing up to Kalam podcast on Patreon for just $3 a month. In addition to supporting the show, you'll gain access to lots of great bonus content. Go to patreon.com and search for Kalam Podcast, or go straight to patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. That's patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the 21st installment of Kalam Digest. We're recording on the 29th of January 2025. I am honored and delighted to welcome my co-host and partner in crime, Sam Kalam. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Agar.
So we're going to talk today about a few different things. Last week we didn't do a Kalam Digest. It might have been because it was my birthday week. I don't really know. But we didn't have time to do it. Today we have a few things to talk about. And I thought I'd just rip it off directly by talking about Gaza and the ceasefire that's happening there. So just like a summary update, during this, or under the ceasefire deal, under the first phase, 33 hostages are set to be released in exchange for hundreds, if not close to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. 7 hostages have already returned home, and 3 civilians, of those 3 civilian women were freed on January 19th, and 4 female soldiers were released on January 25. And this is in exchange for nearly 200 Palestinian prisoners who were released in the past few days. And of these 2,000 Palestinian prisoners who are set to be freed, hundreds of them are kept in administrative detention, which means that they're kind of detained without trial or formal charge, which is essentially the same thing as a hostage. So, I mean, we at Kalam Podcast, we're kind of using the same language that most media does use, which is Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, although let's acknowledge right now that that's kind of inaccurate description of the reality, because there are several Palestinians who are all but name hostages. So that's the latest on the sort of hostage prisoner exchange or swap. When it comes to the actual ceasefire and cessation of hostilities, Israel has violated this several times, but I guess it feels weird to say not in a serious way, because it's obviously serious whenever someone is killed, especially children, of which 2 have been killed in this past few days, as Israel has fired on Palestinians they believe are moving in the wrong way or something, and as well they have bombed and in other ways targeted from the air vehicles they believe are not they shouldn't be in that place. So 2 Palestinians, including a child, were killed, and a Palestinian man and several others were wounded when Israeli forces bombed a bulldozer. But I mean, in the larger scheme of things, the ceasefire is looking to be holding. Hamas hasn't been retaliating for these attacks. They haven't been sending any rockets into Israel. Something that is worrying going forward is Israel's forthcoming ban of UNRWA. They've already announced the ban, but it's going to take effect shortly. And the head of UNRWA and several other sort of UN people are saying that banning UNRWA, if they go through with this, it's going to make holding the ceasefire together extremely difficult, since it would obviously cripple humanitarian work, which is obviously so needed now, as hundreds of thousands of people are literally marching, holding water bottles and their belongings on their backs, marching back to northern Gaza. So the situation is in this apocalyptic hellhole that is Gaza is sort of stable. hundreds of thousands of people are marching back to rubble, essentially. I mean, some people have like halfway homes that they can live in, but most people, I think, they're like bringing their tents that they were staying in the
Yeah.
refugee camps in the south, and they're just gonna put their tents on top of the rubble, which was once their home, which is so insane. But this is the kind of the steadfast nature of Palestinian resistance. This is one of the biggest aspects of it. Just staying on your land,
Mm.
contrary to what Trump would have liked to see, which is Egypt and Jordan receiving the over 1 million of Palestinians. Palestinians don't want that. Egypt and Jordan don't want that. And speaking of Trump, it brings me to today's like weird story. I don't know if you saw this, Sam, but Trump's press secretary during a press briefing said that Doge was kind of like defending the raison d'être of Doge, which is the Department of Government Efficiency, which is run by Elon Musk. And she said that look at this, $30 million were about to be sent via the WHO, which we pulled out of because we don't like them, to do this
Yeah.
and that. And actually, $50 million were earmarked for condoms in Gaza via the WHO. Why would anyone do something so crazy?
Just during this pause, Doge and OMB have actually found that there was $37 million that was about to go out the door to the World Health Organization, which is an organization, as you all know, that President Trump, with the swipe of his pen in that executive order, is no longer wants the United States to be a part of. So that wouldn't be in line with the president's agenda. Doge and OMB also found that there was about to be 50 million taxpayer dollars that went out the door to fund condoms in Gaza. That is a preposterous waste of taxpayer money. So that's what this pause is focused on.
And I don't know, like as most stories out of Trump world, this just seems completely ludicrous and strange. But so they're talking about Gaza in a very odd way still. Sam, I'm going to let you come in just a minute to talk about the latest developments in Lebanon and Syria. But I just thought I'd mention the West Bank, which is where violence is actually ratcheting up. And we spoke recently about like what we thought that Trump might have been giving, what kind of like pledges he's giving the Israelis in exchange for the ceasefire agreement. And we were speculating that like he's probably going to give some kind of green light for military action in the West Bank, for probably some kind of annexation in the West Bank. And we're seeing that. Like we're seeing basically the refugee camps in Jenin and Tulkarem, where Palestinian resistance traditionally has been quite strong. These places are turning into ghost cities as Israeli raids are like going on a daily basis, and even airstrikes from drones and other arrow vehicles. Listen, I don't know these like what exactly are bombing the houses, but they're being bombed on a daily basis. And I can just read a tweet from Mariam Barghouti, a friend of the show, who is reporting on a daily basis from the West Bank. So she writes like this: the situation in the West Bank is escalating really quickly. Jenin refugee camp has been largely depopulated, with the Israeli military confirming they have destroyed more than 30 buildings. While I was there, the explosions were non-stop. Thousands are displaced without shelter. Yesterday, I went to Tulkarem as well, and I have never seen the Israeli military act with such impunity. They've always been violent, but this time it's more sinister and uglier. The city is bulldozed in Tulkarem, an unprecedented move and a serious intensification. In Tulkarem refugee camp, families have no water or electricity, with dozens of families at the edges of the camp displaced at gunpoint overnight. Israel is doing what it has done in Gaza in the West Bank. But for the West Bank, these practices are also paving the way for more settler annexation. This is ethnic cleansing. Everyone I spoke with is describing it as that, ethnic cleansing. obviously, this is Mariam Barghouti's take, and she is like, you know, a sharper voice when it comes to describing what's happening in the West Bank. But I think it would be quite silly to say that this isn't a form of ethnic cleansing. Now, whether the West Bank is going to experience the same kind of genocide that Gaza has experienced it remains to be seen. But it's obviously extremely concerning. And Israel is now also targeting basically anyone. It even targeted two New York Times journalists, like very white people, who were covering these raids. Aaron
Yeah.
Boxerman is one of their names, and they kind of like hit him in the face with a rifle. So impunity is what I'd describe the situation as, or how I describe Israeli military behavior in the West Bank. Sam, I'm going to let you come in first, if you want to comment on what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank, and then please let us know what's going on in Syria and Lebanon.
Yeah, well, I'll start out by saying that I think you're right about the ceasefire in Gaza. I'm somewhat surprised that it's holding up so well. Not to diminish the casualties, of course, that are happening, because Israel is breaking the ceasefire. But let's say strategically it's holding. It doesn't seem to be attacks doesn't seem to be deterring people from returning to their homes. And it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't seem to be escalating. This is not to excuse, of course, what's happening, but it's significant, and I think it's I'm surprised. I would say that perhaps Israel is just, as we're talking about, shifting its focus to the West Bank. But I would say this is also what's going to be the theme of my little talk here is I think it's very significant development is the extent to which the US under Trump, or since Trump took over, or since Trump started basically determining foreign policy in the Middle East, which was a couple of weeks before he took office, the US has been resurgent. It's been making a very strong comeback as a diplomatic player. Just a couple of weeks ago, like before Christmas, I remember us talking about how the US basically lost all of its credibility in the Middle East and was ignored by all other forces, with like Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, carrying out their own kind of making their own accords without even involving the US. And with even some kind of contacts between Turkey, Iran, and other forces, which are very clearly opposed to each other historically. And this seems to have changed very, very, very quickly. So one thing about that is the ceasefire actually holding in Gaza. That is very. I mean, if Israel did whatever it wanted to do in Gaza, it would be killing people en masse. You've seen. They are, as you said, they have been attacking certain vehicles and killing even children. But we've also seen like parades of Hamas soldiers in the streets, which is like, of course, they would have just killed them if they didn't think that this was important for them to hold. There would have been intense fighting and attacks. They've even Hamas has been holding like victory celebrations with like this really weird video of like Hamas fighters and this woman in a full like niqab, throwing like flowers and thing, or like like celebrating, honoring them, etc., on a stage. I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't do that. I can see the point, but just like this is a sign that everyone knows that there will be no all-out fighting in Gaza for the foreseeable future, meaning a couple of weeks then, of course.
Yeah.
So I mean, it might be coming up very soon, but right now everyone knows they need to hold this ceasefire.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they seem to be doing the exact opposite in the West Bank, and with full impunity and with full support, which I think is, again, perhaps the most significant development is the PA not only being like not like a non-entity in terms of Palestinian Israeli relations, but actually siding with the Israelis strongly and all out, carrying out like supportive, um, you know, um, um, supporting strikes and arresting people, etc. So I mean, this is, as we talked about last time on the last digest. I can't see that Fatah, government Fatah, has any kind of credibility left. will we be seeing new elections in the Palestinian territories? I think Hamas would be very interested in that.
Yeah,
Fatah,
exactly.
not so much, because both. If we go back a little bit and talk about what we did see, like during the when the genocide and the war was ongoing, there was a very quick um, um, closing of the conflicts between Fatah and Hamas and the other independent groups. They were, had talks in China, they had talks in Iran, and I think that might very well come back at some point. If the ceasefire holds, Hamas might be very interested in actually holding some kind of elections, because I think they will be interested in that because they might win them. Um, or not. We'll see. But what Fatah is going to do, what their strategy is for actually winning any kind of support within the Palestinian community right now is I have a hard time seeing that.
Yeah,
Also, there's been talks about Hamas pushing very, very strongly for the release of Marwan Barghouti.
exactly.
Uh, as we talked about before, he's not the same guy as Mustafa Barghouti, as we managed to mix him up last time.
Yeah,
But
very
Marwan
different
Barghouti
people.
being a Fatah fighter, basically, part of the armed wing of Fatah, who is extremely popular in Palestinian society and widely seen to be a person who would win any election he would partake in. I think this is clearly like Hamas is then pushing for forming some kind of, let's say, quote unquote, resistance bloc.
Mm.
They where they might actually take full all-out control over the Palestinian Authority in both Gaza and the West Bank, in an election where they would run in tandem with or in cooperation with other forces who are running on a platform of opposing Israel. So there's a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
Palestine is not standing still at any time. But let's move on to talking briefly about Syria and
Yeah.
Lebanon. I
What's going
think
on?
what's going on? Yeah, well, very short, very brief answer is not a lot, not in the last week.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon also mostly holding, but there has been one significant development. Israel was supposed to withdraw fully from Lebanon on Sunday. They did not. Instead, they killed over 20 people in southern Lebanon. They didn't even comment on who they killed. They didn't even claim they were terrorists. They just said, we've shot at people for reasons. And they did not leave. And
Yeah.
of course, the reason they're giving for this is that Hezbollah is not disarming south of the Litani River as they have been demanding.
Yeah.
On the other hand, that's always been their excuse to stay in Lebanon. So for now, there's been the deadline has been pushed forward 2 weeks. So I think it's in the middle of February. They are again called on to have evacuated all of Lebanon. For now, of course, no one can do anything except the US. So the question is the US actually going to do anything here, or are they giving them impunity in Lebanon as well? We don't know, but I think this is a very significant development for Lebanon's sake as well, not just in terms of the actual occupation, but in terms of internal politics, because Lebanon has been moving very quickly towards a resolution of uh, the almost eternal deadlock that the politics of Lebanon has been in for the last, back and forth for a decade at least. They elected a new prime minister. They elected a new president. I think it was the 13th time that they tried electing a new president, and they succeeded. They
Incredible.
chose Youssef Aoun. I don't know. Is he related to Michel Aoun? He has to be the same family, right?
Probably. I don't know though.
The
That's a
former.
question for friend of the show, Ralph Baidoun.
Love Baidoun has to answer this. Yes, but so he is an army general. He's the former head of the Lebanese army. He seems to be widely respected. I mean, in the terms that no one seems to be seeing him as strongly, let's say, sectarian. But he is, of course, a Maronite Christian because the president has to be a Maronite Christian. Um, he doesn't seem to be a good choice for the Hezbollah bloc, but they have been severely weakened, of course, since the fall of Assad. On the other hand, for prime minister, they elected Nawaf Salam,
Mm-hmm.
um, who is very widely respected and also seen generally as a strong critic of Israel. He is the former judge for the ICJ, the International Court. And he
He's
seems to be
very popular,
very popular choice with most people, to me.
especially with like the revolution bloc. If people recall
Yeah.
the 2019 revolution in Lebanon, like a lot of people who partook in that, like of our generation, let's say, like people
Yeah.
between like 30 and 45 years old, they are like, I will literally kiss the feet of all of the members of parliament who voted for this guy, because like finally we have like our fucking guy, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, and they seem to be right in that. He seems to be like not very much like one of these old school, deeply corrupt,
Yeah,
deeply embedded in sectarian mafia politics. But he seems to
exactly.
be like a somewhat, I mean, a decent guy and a respectable, a non-sectarian guy in that sense. But of
Yeah.
course, he's a Sunni Muslim because the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim. And also, I mean, this is speculation, but it seems to me like Aoun is very clearly like let's say a Lebanon state representative. Nawaf Salam seems to be somewhat more of a kind of resistance guy, also in terms of like he had very very strongly positioning himself against Israel, etc. So it might be kind of to some extent it's kind of fusing these different sides. Uh, but I mean, the important development in Lebanon, of course, is that the bloc which formerly sided with Syria is extremely weakened, since the new government in Syria has basically said outright that it has no interest in supporting its former allies in Lebanon. It's
Yeah.
dropped Hezbollah, of course, which makes total sense because the Hezbollah was their main fighting enemy in the war. And it's also, of course, Shara has, or Julani has said that they have repeatedly blocked attempts to smuggle arms into Lebanon for use by Hezbollah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this is what they have to say because they are expected to do this by their allies. But it seems clear that they are actually dropping the whole bloc that was allied with Syria is no longer has any kind of support from that side, which I think is, I mean, it might seem obvious, as I just said. I mean, Hezbollah was their enemy, but on the other hand, Syria has been involved in Lebanese politics for, since forever.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I mean, is Syria just going to leave Lebanon to its own accords? That would be very, very
Yeah. Probably not,
new. That would be a new
but
development.
the fact that like the recent shakeup in Lebanese politics, where like a new president was elected and the new prime minister was appointed, and all of these things like that. I mean, this is possible because of the absence of like Assad style Syria authoritarian government,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I mean, absolutely. That's a big shift. Yeah, and I mean, and Aoun at least was elected with, I think it was like 95 out of 120 delegates or something. So that's a wide majority. And before it's been more like they're really lucky if they manage to get like one vote,
Yeah.
more than half. So I mean, that's interesting. We have to watch this going forward. Hezbollah is severely weakened. I would say, like, when the war with Israel ended, I was very, very certain that Hezbollah would just come back. This is not a problem for them. But
Yeah.
then the fall of Assad, on the other hand, this is a severe, severe problem for them. But on the other hand, of course, if Israel is staying in southern Lebanon, the opinion in Lebanon, as we've talked about before, is strongly or majority is anti-Hezbollah,
Mm-hmm.
but a very, very strong majority is anti-Israel. So if
Yeah,
Israel
yeah.
seems to be like involving itself in Lebanese politics again, perhaps not Hezbollah as such, but armed resistance against Israeli forces will gain popularity very quickly, I would say. It's been like it's always been like a mass support for this during the entire period from the 60s and forward. Um, yeah, so let's just mention briefly the last some more points about Syria internally. Uh, the new government, the HTS government, let's call it that, even though it's somewhat broader, has been in a number of negotiations. They are meeting Russia, I think it was perhaps yesterday or today, uh, Russia over the question of keeping Russian military bases running in the country. Of course, there will be also some kind of question of support in terms of money probably from Russia to keep that. But more importantly, they've been meeting with European Union officials, and they seem to have secured some kind of deal where the sanctions, which are mostly still in place actually,
Yeah.
the sanctions against Syria will be lifted over the coming months in return for a democratic development and respect
So
for
can I
minorities.
just jump in? So those the sanctions have they? Is that like both EU and US sanctions? Are everyone going to lift them? Has that been agreed?
I'm not sure if that's been specified yet, but it seems, yeah, seem to be working somewhat in tandem here. And I mean, I'm pretty certain that the EU and the US has a strong common view on this. But I think it's interesting firstly, the fact that the sanctions are still in place.
Well,
There's been
yeah,
this broad idea that this was all orchestrated by the Western powers or something like that. That, the US and Israel even were like behind the HTS. If that had been the case, it wouldn't have taken many days before the sanctions were lifted, or at least that was announced. Now it's been it's been much more than a month, almost 2 months, and only now are we seeing that the sanctions are being lifted and there are discussions going on. Secondly, that the European Union or the Western powers seem to be actually worried about the question of, like, as we mentioned before, the question of democracy, the question of inclusivity of
yeah.
minorities, etc. So yeah, there seem to be things happening, but slowly. And lastly, what is going on with the Kurds, the
What is
major
going on with
sticking?
the Kurds?
Well, we never know. Well, the basic thing seems to be that there's some kind of deal being hammered out between Turkey and the US, or at least that is where it's standing at the moment. And as I mentioned before, the US has made a strong, strong comeback here. And I think that there will be some kind of deal under Trump. And I'm worried that it will be very bad for the Kurds. They might just drop them.
Yeah,
And just let Turkey kind of take over. That is a possibility. It would never have happened, I think, or I'm pretty certain it wouldn't have happened under Biden. But we even saw like or the US government propping up the Kurdish positions in December, for example. And now I'm not so sure. Trump is first and foremost, he's a non-interventionist. He wants to kind of get out of most things that he can't just bomb to pieces. So I would say, like, we have to wait and see what that deal will be. The suggestion, quote unquote, from Turkey and independently similar from the government in Damascus is that the SDF, the Kurdish forces, should be reintegrated into the Syrian army, which, of course, for natural reasons, the Kurds are very skeptical about.
yeah,
They want to kind of keep their own military capabilities. But on the other hand, it seems, the government in Damascus seems very strongly anti-federalist or anti-cantonization. So I mean, I think that's a very strong trend right now in the Middle East, let's say. Both
yeah,
Lebanon and Syria are moving quickly away from a situation where they were basically very weak national states, fractured sectarianism style, towards something that, if it doesn't end up in civil war, will mean much stronger central governments, much stronger or more unified states,
yeah,
which will have, very, very wide repercussions if it actually happens. Strong unified Syria under a popular democratically elected government, or even a popular non-democratically elected government, would be a very, very strong player in the Middle East, of course,
yeah.
and in the long term be a huge threat against Israel.
Indeed, it would. Well, I guess maybe we should leave it there for today. We've discussed several developments in this region, and we're just going to have to follow it week by week, which we are doing on Kalam Digest, the Kalam podcast weekly news summary. We've been reporting today on the 29th of January, 2025. Sam Karl Samra, let's sign out. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Agar.